All right, everybody, good morning. Thank you for joining us for our first breakout session on cybersecurity and the Internet of Things with Dave Hatter. So Dave is a technology leader with nearly 30 years of software development, cybersecurity, and project management experience. He has earned numerous industry certifications. I'm not going to try to attempt to pronounce all of them, but he's very well-versed in the industry, and he's very good at bridging the gap between business technology and has delivered more than 200 successful software solutions, earning nearly 60 testimonial letters from clients. He's been on numerous media outlets. I'm always seeing him on LinkedIn, on channel Local 12, 700 WLW and all that. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dave and he will run through our presentation for this morning.
Thanks. So in other words, I'm an old nerd, right? That's really what it boils down to. So I got a lot of information in here. I'm going to go pretty fast. You can certainly have this slide deck when we're done. It's got a lot of what I hope you will find will be actionable information. So hopefully, without creating too much fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD, as we sometimes call it in the industry, hopefully we'll educate you, motivate you, give you some actionable advice. Again, there's a lot of resources and so forth in this slide deck you can walk away from here to take back to your IT people or your management team and take a hard look at what you're doing. And hopefully we'll have a little fun along the way. I try not to take myself too seriously despite what often seems to be a lot of bad news. So I love this quote. It's a takeoff of a Warren Buffett quote. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and a few minutes of cyber incident to ruin it. And if you kind of keep that in mind as we go through this presentation, I think it'll help you sort of understand my perspective on this. So this is a topic that's ripped from the headlines. Before I do one of these presentations, I try to go out and just scan different magazines, different news sites and so forth and find some cybersecurity related headlines. Obviously, I'm not going to read all of these to you. But again, I don't know how many of you have a spare $200,000 in your budget for a cyber attack. And I can give you plenty of instances of companies that never recover from these kinds of attacks. And I thought these last three here were pretty pertinent. Ransomware attack, why a small business paid the $150,000 ransom. I'm sure most of you don't have a spare 150 large sitting around to pay for a ransom to get your data back or so that you don't get doxxed. Working from home causes surge in security breaches, staff oblivious to best practices. This is something I've talked about a lot recently, and we'll try to weave into this presentation, particularly around the Internet of Things, because as people bring these smart devices into their home environment is already typically less secure than the corporate environment, and all those devices create additional surface area. We'll talk about that specifically. And then only 31% of Americans concerned with data security, despite a 400% rise in cyber attacks. The FBI has recently reported numerous times. They have a website. It's one of the resources I have in here, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, ic3.org. If you, your family, anyone you know thinks they're a victim of cybercrime, I would encourage you to go report it there. In all likelihood, there won't be any prosecutions as a result, but that's where that 400% rise came from. They're seeing an enormous increase in the amount of fraud and crimes related to cyber reported through that site. So again, at Entrust, we work with companies to provide outsourced IT and cybersecurity related services. And I hear a lot of scary things the customers tell me that tell me they just don't really take this seriously. And unfortunately, in many cases, that leads to disaster. Again, I'm not going to read all these bullet points to you, but the one I thought was one of the most scary things I've heard and really illustrated the lack of understanding about how all of this works today and why you're such a threat. The first one. Quote, what do I care if someone gets the password to my email account? Hell, let them have it. We lock our building at 6 p.m. anyway, so I'd like to see them try. Thus illustrating that this person doesn't understand someone doesn't need to get to their PC to access their email and do something like a business email compromise attack, which I'll talk about more specifically as we get a little further down the road. And then some of these cartoons I've tried to throw in here to add a little levity. We've narrowed our security risks down to these two groups, everyone who works here and everyone who doesn't work here. And unfortunately, that's kind of where we're at today. So there's a lot of cybersecurity related myths out there. I like to try to dispel these through the presentation. A lot of people think my organization is too insignificant to be a target. And I can tell you, we work with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, and their bad guys are constantly trying to hack them because in many cases, they're much less secure. They don't understand the risks. They don't have the budget. They don't have the resources to really secure themselves. And again, I want to keep reemphasizing this fact with people working remotely, especially people working from home or possibly rolling into the local Panera or Starbucks and getting on your corporate network from these remote devices. That's creating a lot of potential additional security risks. My data or the data I have isn't valuable. Cybersecurity requires a huge financial investment. It can be expensive, but I'm going to propose that you take a risk-based approach and you prioritize your risks and spend your money in the areas where you have the most risks, because a big part of this is just making yourself a harder target. And I'll come back to that. Attacks are sophisticated or technically complex. Some of them are, many of them are not. A lot of it revolves around social engineering and the bad guys having the guts to do things like pick up the phone and call you and pretend to be someone they're not so that you'll give up information they need to complete their attack. New software and devices are secure out of the box. I think this is particularly pertinent to the construction business as it gets more automated and you have people working in the field, more Internet of Things or smart devices out there. So many of these things are not secure out of the box. And I'm going to talk about that specifically a little later in the presentation when we get into the defense perspective of this. Cyber breaches are covered by general liability insurance. In many, if not most cases, they're not. And even if you have cyber insurance, and if you're a business owner or a senior executive in a business, I strongly encourage you to look into it. If you don't have it, you really have to understand the parameters of your policy. There are plenty of examples out there of organizations like AIG who are trying to deny claims because the attack appears to have been launched by a nation state actor, someone like China or North Korea, and they're saying that's an act of war and thus not covered under the policy. So cyber insurance is sort of a nation area. It's emerging. It's difficult, but it's something you should look into, and I would strongly encourage you to get it and get the right kind of policy. And that cybersecurity is only an IT issue. It's really much more than an IT issue because we're all using so much more technology every day in the work that we're doing, regardless of what we do or what industry we're in. A few construction-specific risks that I'll try to highlight as we get into the threat portion of this and the defense portion. Construction obviously has a highly mobile workforce. People are working all over the place. They're going from one job site to another. It's something I heard Stephen mention from in his presentation. When you talk about BIM and all the information that has to be exchanged between the various subcontractors. A lot of information is shared. Some of that information is probably confidential and sensitive. The bad guys want that for any number of different reasons. Bring your own device. A lot of times in the construction business, you have subcontractors, they're bringing their devices, they're connecting to your networks. That's a potential significant security problem. High turnover in the industry when you couple it with all the first few bullets there. Again, all that data that's being shared, particularly as it relates to intellectual property, could be very valuable to your competitors or frankly to overseas competitors who want to steal that information because they don't want to make the investment like KLH did in the systems that they're building. Internet of Things, we've already touched on this. And then and this is something I think many people do not really consider, as our physical world is increasingly automated and interconnected with our virtual world, there's the possibility of hackers breaking into your systems and causing physical harm, whether it's making some device out on a construction site go awry, or it's something along the lines of somewhere down the road, they break into a system you designed for a business that isn't secured correctly, and they cause some sort of physical harm in the building, set off the fire detector or the fire prevention system, that sort of thing. These are risks that we increasingly face. So why is all this happening now? I think a lot of this is self-explanatory. We've got increasing use of technology, but some is less self-explanatory to folks who aren't in technology. It's never been easier for bad guys to use cloud-based services, in particular in other countries that are virtually untraceable and make them pretty much outside the reach of US law enforcement. I can go anywhere in the world for probably 20 bucks a month, spin up a cloud-based server, buy data off the dark web, launch all kinds of phishing or smishing, which is text-based attacks, run it for a few days, see what I get, shut it down, go to another country, spin up another server. I can pay for these things with things like gift cards. I can use virtual international currency that's untraceable like Bitcoin or Monero, other types of cryptocurrency, not only to pay for these services, but in many cases to collect the ransoms. So it's, all of this can be encrypted. It's very difficult for the bad guys to get caught if they have any technological savvy whatsoever. And frankly, because of either free tools or very low cost hacking tools coupled with all these cloud-based resources that I can spin up and spin down very quickly at little cost, it's never been easier for them to, launch some very, very sophisticated large-scale attacks and very difficult to get caught. We have an increasing number of connected devices. I've already touched on this several times. And then the fact that we're all spending more time online, we're doing more work online, we're using more digital tools, we're putting more information out there. You can see in this slide just the sheer volume of things that's happening in 1 minute on the internet. And I don't think that's probably news to anyone, although this does a nice job of quantifying it. And digital transformation is upon us. Many people weren't planning to be working from home or working remotely like they do now until the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And now all of a sudden, folks were forced to go home, in many cases work with their own devices on their own home networks that aren't surely as secure as their corporate networks. That creates a problem not only for you as an individual, but for your organization. And this all happened very quickly. The bad guys know this. We already mentioned in that one slide that the FBI said a 400% increase in cybercrime. If you go out and look at research from cybersecurity vendors, people like Malwarebytes or Barracuda that make software and services around cybersecurity, they're seeing huge increases in attacks as well, because the bad guys know people are working from home. They don't have the same level of security there. And in many cases, they don't really have anyone to turn to for help. So, it's kind of like shooting fish in a barrel. We've already kind of touched on the working remotely again, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. There have been numerous huge companies like Barclays Bank in London or Fujitsu in Japan, where they have tens of thousands of people working from home, and their CEOs have said, we don't intend to bring these people back into the office regularly. We're going to use things like hot desking and hoteling so that if folks need to come into the office, they have a place to work, but we're not going to bring people back to the office regularly. And then another big part of this, why this is happening now, surveillance capitalism. We have all these smart devices. They're collecting enormous amounts of information about us, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly. In the industry, you might hear the term data exhaust. All the information that's captured by these smart devices that you aren't necessarily putting in, things like location information. So all of that information is valuable. Some of it has intrinsic value because they're going to use it to target ads to you. They're going to sell it to other companies that want to do the same. Some of it has less value until it's coupled with other things, like if I can get all of this sort of information, even if I don't have things like passwords about you off the dark web, then I can use that in some very crafty social engineering attacks. I can send you phishing related emails. I can send you smishing related texts that seem very realistic because I might have an old password for you. I might have information about you that I bought off the dark web from some data breach or these dossiers these data broker companies are building, and use that. So again, your data is valuable, whether you think it is or not. The bad guys want it. In some cases, they're using it in sort of semi-legitimate ways. It's just marketing, but in other cases, they're using it to hack you. And then again, the attack surface grows every day. We're connecting more and more devices that are, quote, smart. And sadly, many of them aren't smart. They're full of all kinds of security flaws and bugs. But we're connecting these things into our work environment. We're connecting these things into our home environment. And oftentimes with that little thought, and I thought this cartoon's kind of funny. Can I interest you in a firewall for your toaster? And why do you need an internet connected toaster? Is it really that important to know that the toast is done via text in the other room? I'm saying no. And yes, I'm a tinfoil hat guy. I have virtually zero smart devices other than traditional things like cell phone, mobile phones and computers in my house, because I don't want that increased attack surface. And then the rise in Internet of Things devices is exploding. I don't know that that's news to anyone. You can see there's some projections here. They're saying by 2025, they're expected to have 75.44 billion Internet of Things devices or smart devices connected to the internet. And you can see, through this infographic here, the representation. Our cars are connected. Virtually everything is connected today. All of that is collecting information. All of that information is valuable. The bad guys want it. And each one of those connected devices is a potential attack surface into your network. And then I've sort of hit on this before. Security is often an afterthought for these devices. So many of these things out of the box are inherently insecure. The vendor wants to be the first to market. They don't spend too much time thinking about security, and they know that the average person isn't too concerned about it. And to some extent, they're in a difficult position of trying to balance security versus functionality and flexibility. If I make a device, I sell it to you, and it's too hard for you to use, chances are you'll get frustrated and you won't use it. You might return it. You certainly won't be happy about it. versus, you know, if I just throw it out there with some minimum security and it's very easy for you to set up and use, you know, you might be happy from that perspective, but you may not realize the hole that that's creating in your network. And we see so much of that. You can go do your own research very quickly and see that a huge number of IoT devices are just inherently insecure and leaving you, your family, your organization open to attack if you don't take steps to secure them. And we'll get to that in a minute. Another reason why this is happening now, crime has gone digital. We touched on some of these things like the simplicity of spinning up servers and the low cost, but the bad guys are making huge amounts of money at this. You can see here one study by Dr. Michael McGuire put the value of the cybercrime economy at 1.5 trillion. The FBI reported last year that in the last 5 years leading up to 2019, business email compromise, and I'll talk more specifically about that in a bit, which usually starts with a phishing-related attack, is a $26 billion a year enterprise. And these folks are rarely prosecuted. Go out and look for examples. Even in some of the most egregious hacks and breaches, you'll often find there's very few prosecutions there because so much of this is done in a way that it's very difficult to attribute who did it. It's very difficult to track these people down, and they're often offshore. So I already kind of mentioned they're making big money. Here's an example. Now, again, no one really knows exactly how much money these cyber criminals are making, obviously. This is from the IC3. I mentioned this before, the FBI, and you can see, I mean, almost like a hockey stick effect in what they're projecting the cyber criminals are making. So they're making lots of money. Again, I don't want to delve too deep into this. This is from Deloitte. I thought it was pretty interesting because in many cases, folks are not thinking about the hidden or less visible costs of a breach, right? Some of these are pretty obvious. You might have to pay a fine depending on the kind of information that was stolen, the industry you're in, that sort of thing. You're probably going to have to spend money on improvements. You may need to spend money on attorney fees. You might need forensics, which is very expensive. But then there's all these under the surface costs that aren't as obvious, right? Loss of intellectual property. Again, you may have very sensitive proprietary information, how you estimate jobs, that sort of thing that gets lost, that, you know, took years and potentially hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars to develop. And then another reason why this is happening now, you know, there's more bad guys in the game. And I like this slide because I think it does a nice job of sort of breaking down the different levels. You have folks out there just fooling around, the dudes and the hackers in their mom's basement. You have criminals who are simply in it to make money, but kind of lone wolf types, hacktivists, people that are in it for political reasons, organized crime. These guys are making a lot of money and doing a lot of damage. And then, of course, you have your state-sponsored actors, or in the industry usually known as APTs, advanced persistent threats, to people like China and Iran. You know, they want to cause chaos. They want to steal state secrets. They want to steal intellectual property. If you're, for example, some drug company and you're working on a new drug and you spend $1 billion to develop that drug, and some hacker can just break in and steal all that information for some Chinese company, obviously that's hugely valuable to them. And another reason this is happening out, your data is increasingly valuable. This is an estimate from Experian about what your data is worth on the dark web, right? So someone might be willing to pay as much as $1,000 to $2,000 for passport information. They might be willing to pay $1,000 to $1,000 for a medical record, depending on what it is. And so you can see different examples here, but even though you may not think you have anything worthwhile, your data is valuable. People want it and they're willing to pay for it, and thus the bad guys are willing to try to steal it. And then already kind of hit on this idea, people are still the weakest link. Unfortunately, you have a lot of people, as that one headline said, they're kind of oblivious, right, to all of this stuff. And I understand that to a degree, right? If you're not a nerd like me, you don't want to know all this stuff. You just want to do your job. You want to be left alone, live your life, etc. I totally understand that. But unfortunately, because of the inherent insecurity of so many of our software and hardware products out there, you really need to start taking these things seriously and take steps to improve your cybersecurity posture. The good news is, as you'll see here in just a second, it's not nearly as hard or as expensive as it sounds. And if each person in your organization were more aware about what was going on and would take this more seriously, you could make your organization a much harder target, which, except in the case of someone like an advanced persistent threat or a nation state actor, the bad guys will move on to a softer target, right? So we don't want you to be a Dave, right? We want you to be secure, aware, and taking steps, in many cases, simple steps to protect yourself, your family, and your organization. And that's the additional benefit of this. As our lives become more digital, and we spend more time in these virtual environments where things are interconnected, steps you're taking to protect yourself or steps you're taking to protect your organization overlap and intersect in a way that they both become more secure as a result. So as we get into the threat aspect of this and then the defense aspect of this, I would ask you to simply think about these three things. When you get something unusual, if you get an email that's asking you to do something you've never done before, or possibly from a dubious source, or a text, because keep in mind, there are all these different attack vectors they'll come after you with now. Just stop. Think about what it's asking you to do. You know, you should be highly skeptical of anything you get nowadays. Think about what it's asking to do and then focus on protect, right? I can tell you, I would be much happier with an employee or a coworker if they didn't do something that maybe made a customer angry, slowed down a payment or something like that, made an executive angry, then if they put the company out of business or they cost me $500,000 in ransom payments because they didn't take the time to really think about it, what was being asked for, and then either going out of band, I'll explain in a minute what that means, to confirm that it's legitimate, or going to their manager and saying, hey, I got this thing, I'm concerned about this, what should I do, right? It's, again, raising that awareness and making people stop, think about what they're doing, and then be a human firewall. Don't be a Dave, protect yourself, your family, your organization. So these are some recent trends in what's going on out there in this space, intrusion attempts. You know, anytime the bad guys can get into your network, you know, there are all kinds of stats out there that say it will usually take months, if not years, to detect someone in there unless you have advanced intrusion protection and systems and SIEM software that can find these kind of things. They can lurk around in there forever, and that's how they get their biggest scores. They see what you're doing, they see who you're doing business with, they look for sensitive information that they can release. They infect you with ransomware and, you know, shut your business down till you pay the ransom. Ransomware attacks is broken out in here separately. IoT malware, Internet of Things malware, right? As we get more and more of these devices online, again, that's more of a security threat. So that's kind of what's going on. ISC Squared is a well-respected industry organization that focuses on cybersecurity. I'm not going to read all this to you, but again, this is the kind of thing I would encourage you to take back, share with your management, share with your IT people. These are different methods of attack they're seeing out there in the field. And sadly, some of these things like web application attacks, SQL injection in particular, this is a well-known form of attack that's been around for decades, and yet it's still a prominent type of attack that we see out there. It's not that difficult to fix once you understand it and know how to find it and mitigate it in your applications. So, but unfortunately, these things don't get taken care of. A few principles I think you also need to think about in addition to my sort of simplistic stop, think, protect. You know, it's almost impossible to be 100% secure. Even air-gapped systems that aren't connected to anything else, researchers have shown they can be hacked with the right technologies. So I don't think it's the right focus is to say we're going to be absolutely impenetrable. You almost have to assume you're going to get breached at some point, and then focus on risk. What is the most sensitive data we have? What do we need to protect the most? How can we make ourselves a harder target so that the bad guys will try to get in, and when they can't, they won't see the return on investment. They won't be willing to expend the effort, and they'll want to move on to a softer target where they can get a quick score and move on. You need to focus on risk. Again, where is the risk? What needs the most protection? How do we take steps to protect that? And then work our way down that risk chain. You need to take a layered approach to security. So if they get through one defense, they hopefully will be stopped by the next defense in the layers, like it's sort of an onion, right? Unfortunately, these threats emerge and evolve constantly. There have been an enormous amount of attacks tied to COVID-19, and they're very devious and crafty. Phishing related emails about the PPP program, the IRS program, emails with a file attached saying you've been exposed to COVID, fill out this form and go to your local healthcare organization. They're constantly changing their tactics, and they're constantly probing to try to find holes in software. So, you know, you have to stay aware of what's going on out there and then maintain a healthy dose of skepticism. And again, focus on stop, think, protect. Here are some of the most common threats you're likely to run into. I'm going to touch on a few of these pretty quickly, and then to get into some defenses and give you some resources you can take back for things that you can do as an individual and then things that you can do as an organization to make yourself a harder target, to improve that cybersecurity posture, and hopefully make the bad guys move on to a softer target. So phishing attacks, and again, I'm going to lump into that smishing attacks, which is text-based phishing, and even vishing attacks. Vishing is voice-based phishing. You know, they will call you and pretend to be someone else. It's never been easier to go to something like LinkedIn and or your company website and or Facebook, do what's known as open source intelligence, figure out who works for a company, figure out who the executives are, pretend to be someone, and literally they'll have the guts to make a phone call, might leave you a voice message. You have to be skeptical of anything that is unusual. Anytime you're being asked for information that is new, you should be skeptical, stop, think, protect. You know, Trojan horses and ransomware are types of malware. You can kind of lump that into the virus bucket. Unpatched software, huge problem. Going to delve into that in much more detail here in a minute. You have social media as another mechanism or channel for phishing type attacks, and a way to get open source intelligence that they're going to use to break into your organization. So probably one of the greatest threats we face, and something that everyone can do as an individual and as an organization, is better password management, right? People, despite year after year after year, these studies coming out saying these are the worst 10 passwords, these are the worst 100 passwords, still do all kinds of crazy things with passwords, right? Every account you have should have a strong, unique password. What's a strong password? Well, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, recently changed the guidance on that. You know, it used to be like, you know, just come up with a crazy series of letters, numbers, and symbols, and the longer the better. And that's good. Well, obviously those are really hard to remember, and longer is better, right? The longer you make a password under any circumstances, the harder it will be to crack. But the new guidance is, rather than use these crazy symbols, letters, numbers, etc., come the business email compromise attack to make a video talking about the damage it did to his company.
Yep.
Hello? Okay, so here's a couple screenshots of phishing. Here's an example, right? And this is what I mean by stop, think, protect. I can look at this. This was an email. In my spare time, I also happen to be the mayor of Fort Wright, so you're going to see some screenshots here from my Fort Wright-based email account. So this is an example of a spear phishing attack. They sent it to me. Apparently there's this invoice attached, right? But notice right off the bat, this leaps out at me. This is not a very good spoofing job, because I can see this did not come from any sort of account I recognize. We certainly don't do business with any organizations in Russia, so I just dismissed that out of hand, right? Here's an example of business email compromise, right? So this, someone, again, not a great job of spoofing. They used my name, which they could get off the Fort Wright website, they could find on LinkedIn. They did not appropriately spoof the email address, but you'll see some examples here in a second when they did. They sent this to our public works director, right? And then you can see, now this has a lot of red flags in it, okay? You know, the grammar's not great, the punctuation's not great, and of course, I want him to go get some gift cards, right, to give to city council. But my point of this particular email is they did take the time to find out that I was the mayor. They put a signature block in here. This doesn't look anything like my real signature block. They figured out that Jeff is an employee there. So this isn't just a carpet bombing type attack. This is more of a spear phishing type attack, right? Notice, let me know if you can do that right away, because there's a sharp deadline for this request. Now, thankfully, we only have about 40 employees. Everyone knows everyone, and I'm constantly warning and talking about these things, and we do phishing-related training in the city. So, you know, they're on high alert for this sort of thing. Thankfully, Jeff immediately saw the red flags, knew this thing was fake. But you can see this is for someone who doesn't understand that this is a possibility, and for someone that's not paying attention, someone that is not stopping, thinking about the request, and focused on protecting the organization, wouldn't be hard to fall prey to that. Now, here's a few more. These get better. So Tim is the CEO of Intrust, right? Rebecca is our CFO. Here's an example. This email came in through Outlook. You can see it was sent to Rebecca. Hey, Rebecca, I need you to take care of a financial obligation. Okay, they did a much better job. To the naked eye, this is much more realistic looking, okay? And I'll hit you with a few more. Now, this is showing here, if you know how to look at the properties of an email in Outlook, you can see that this was spoofed to look like it came from Tim, but look at the reply to address here. It's actually going to an AOL account. So again, this one, much harder to detect by the naked eye, and why you have to stop, think, protect, you know, the vague language about, I need you to do a wire transfer. And when you get something like this, you got to stop and go, okay, Tim, I got this supposed email from you. Is this real? What should I do with this? Here's a final one. This one came to my City of Fort Wright account. I thought this is kind of an interesting tactic here, right? This looks like some type of legitimate email address, right? And you can see here, Dave, my name is Keith Booth. I'm a senior partner at Brown and Booth. Your spouse has contacted me to prepare the divorce papers. Here's the first draft. Please contact me as soon as possible. Now, notice if I mouse over this, look where that link is going, right? It's taking me off to some URL, God knows where. I'm certainly not going to click that. But, you know, they're taking advantage of the fact that you're probably going to be somewhat shocked and disturbed by this. You're going to want to try to get to the bottom of this. The bad guys are very crafty. They're constantly changing their attacks. You must be vigilant. Stop, think, protect. And there's still all kinds of malware out there, right? Viruses, worms, keystroke loggers. Keystroke loggers are particularly devious. That link from that so-called law firm might have been an attempt to do a drive-by download and hit me with a keystroke logger, where now they're literally capturing every keystroke for everything I type in. They could see when I went to my bank, etc. They'd have everything, right? So malware, serious problem. You can see the growth in malware over time. Ransomware is another especially devious form of malware. It's causing huge problems out there. We've even seen police departments, for example, pay the ransom because their data is encrypted, right? So if you don't really understand ransomware, also ransomware could have been the result from that supposed law firm email. I click that link, it downloads a program to my computer, it runs silently in the background, and encrypts all the data on my computer, and even worse, if it can, it'll scan the network I'm connected to and attempt to encrypt the data on everything it finds out there. So I might be working from home on my insecure computer, I'm connected to my corporate office in a way that's not really secure. Ransomware hits my machine, it makes its way to the network, it encrypts everything in the company basically, and you're out of business unless you pay the ransom. There's no guarantee if you pay the ransom you'll get your money back, and they've added a new, even more devious and evil angle into this. As an added incentive to get you to pay the ransom, now they'll dox you. They'll say, if you don't pay, not only will you not be able to get your data back, but we're going to release all that data to the public. So, you know, it could be embarrassing. It could have corporate secrets. It could have financial penalties tied to it because you have HIPAA information or God knows what. So, I mean, ransomware, huge threat, something to be aware of and defend against, which we'll get to. Free software, a lot of free, so-called free software is free because either A, you are not the customer, you are the product, you're not paying with money, you're paying with data, or worse, in many cases, it's really malware. It's stealing information from your computer. You can see here, here's the story. Google has removed these Android apps from the Play Store and you should delete them immediately. These stories are coming up all the time because bad guys will build a quote free app for you to use and it turns out that it's basically malware. Again, we'll come back to some defenses on this in a minute. More and more people are doing things virtually. They're using free platforms. They'll find something like Slack, and not to pick on Slack or Jira, or there's a number of great platforms out there that can be very powerful tools for your business, but you need to do your homework before you download any free software or use any free anything. You need to vet it. You need to understand who has access to your data, what they're doing with it. Are they selling your data? How secure is it? Because in many cases, these things, again, they're not very secure, and you could have sensitive proprietary data out there in the wild very quickly. Mobile devices, already touched on this a bit. As we get more mobile devices, particularly bring your own devices connected to your network, it's a huge potential threat and something, and there are lots of ways to mitigate that threat, but that's a problem. Not to mention people occasionally lose those devices, right? Public Wi-Fi, another threat. If you go into a Panera, you go into a Starbucks, McDonald's, pick your place, doesn't really matter, and you just jump on their public Wi-Fi, you are just asking to be hacked. So again, I'm going to have a whole section here in a minute on some defenses for these particular things. Do not use public Wi-Fi, especially unless you have a VPN. I never use public Wi-Fi, literally never. My phone has a hotspot. If I need to get connected to the internet from a non-secure network I'm not in control of, I never use public Wi-Fi. I always use the hotspot on my phone. We already touched on this. I thought this graphic was extremely funny. So these are all these so-called smart devices, each one in its own way trying to extort you. Again, I think this thing is pretty funny. We're talking about potentially 75 billion smart devices by 2025, often insecure out of the box, often without security in mind, often entry point into your network. Information exposure, as states and organizations like the EU are passing increasingly privacy-friendly laws, you as an organization are potentially at significant risk if you have customers in those areas and you have a data breach. So again, I'm not going to read all these things to you, but if you're not familiar with the California Consumer Protection Act and the GDPR, the General Data Privacy Regulation in the EU, and there are several states in the US that have laws like these sort of working their way through the system, strongly encourage you to check that out, because you could find yourself staring down the barrel of some amazing fines if you violate those laws through some sort of data breach. And again, a data breach might be hackers steal it, or it could be in misconfiguration. Someone just accidentally emails something they shouldn't have. I thought this is kind of funny. Our devices are secure. How'd you do that? I turned them all off. Sadly, we don't need to go there. So the rest of this is focused on what you can do. I know I'm going to run out of time here fairly quickly, so I'm going to touch on the high points here. Again, I tried to cram a lot of information in here that would be actionable for you to take away and use for yourself. Password hygiene. One of the best things you can do for yourself is have a strong, unique password for every account. I've shown an example here of a passphrase. Now, if someone knows you love pizza with onions, that might not be the greatest passphrase. But if people don't know that, this would be a great passphrase, very difficult to crack, easy to remember. What I would recommend even more so than that, though, is use a password manager. There are great password managers out there. At Entrust, we recommend LastPass. This is an example of a screenshot from LastPass. I use it every day. RoboForm, Dashlane, OnePass. There's a bunch of good ones out there. Again, big fan of LastPass. It has some very advanced capabilities. It's very secure. One of the things that's great about it is, here's an example of where I'm saying, I want LastPass to generate a password for me. Okay, it's 30 characters long. As you can see, it's a combination of letters, symbols, and numbers. This will be virtually impossible to crack. And the most important part is, because of the way LastPass works, I don't need to remember it. When I go to log into the site that password is connected to, LastPass will hand it off for me. I don't need to care what that password is. And my general advice for people with password managers is, if the site will let you use a 256 character password, set this to 256 characters. It's virtually uncrackable. And then do things like use Have I Been Pwned, or Firefox and Chrome both now have the capability to search and see if the password you're using has been breached somewhere. And then obviously you'd want to change it. Multi-factor authentication, also sometimes called two-factor authentication or two-step verification. Probably the next best thing you can do. Use it everywhere you can. Both Microsoft and Google have come out recently and said, simply using multi-factor authentication will stop 99% of all automated attacks. Again, making yourself a harder target, making the bad guys want to move on. If you have strong username and passwords across all your accounts, and you have multi-factor authentication turned on all your accounts, again, you're not completely unhackable. A nation state actor like China can figure out how to work around these, and the FBI has warned about certain types of attacks. But for the average person, simply turning on multi-factor authentication, most of you have probably experienced this through your bank or something because it's been around for a while, will make you a very difficult target. Modern platforms like Office 365. Most of our clients use Office 365. We've had a big push on to work with our clients to get them to use the multi-factor authentication on Office 365, and thus make them much harder to attack. Turn on multi-factor authentication anywhere and everywhere you can. This is an example of authenticator apps that generate the one-time passcode you need to log in, and this is an example of text-based one-time passcodes. But again, once that's turned on, not only does the bad guy need your username and password, but they're going to need to have access to that one-time passcode to get into your account, making it very, very difficult for them. Software updates. If you don't take away anything else from this today, good password hygiene, multi-factor authentication, and software updates, and you will go a long way towards making yourself, your family, and your organization much safer. The problem with software updates, and it's gotten easier over the years. Windows has made this very easy to do it automatically. But the problem is then, like, for example, here, I happen to have a Lenovo PC, right? Well, Lenovo was putting out firmware updates for the hardware in that device. So just installing the Windows updates doesn't get me there. I got to install those too, right? I need to update the software that runs on top of Windows. So my Firefox browser, my Chrome browser, other apps installed like the Windows Store apps. You need to be installing software updates regularly. If you have an IT organization, hopefully they're trying to automate this process for you. If you don't, unfortunately, there's a lot of moving parts. You need to make sure you're updating your router regularly. I'm going to come back to that in a second. You need to be sure that you're updating your antivirus software regularly. You need some type of antivirus software on your machine, anti-malware, antivirus, sometimes called endpoint protection. This is from Gartner, well-respected industry organization, showing you the leaders in antivirus software. And notice Microsoft, the built-in antivirus software that comes with Microsoft Windows 10 is one of the leading packages out there. And this touches on my point that all of this stuff doesn't have to be expensive. Some of this is just awareness, knowing that you can turn on multi-factor authentication, doesn't cost anything. Knowing that Microsoft Defender, the antivirus software that comes in Windows, turn it on, it works really well, costs you nothing extra. So again, it's not always expensive or requires a lot of advanced technical skill to do these things. It just requires awareness. But you got to have anti-malware software. You should have it on your phone. You should have it on your tablet. You should have it on your PC. And you got to make sure that you're updating it regularly like the rest of the software. There's a lot of technical things we could talk about with the Wi-Fi router at home. You need to make sure you're using WPA2 or higher encryption, so that when people try to connect to that, they have to know your password. It makes it difficult to get connected to your network, right? A couple other things: enable a firewall. You must update that firmware, the software inside the router regularly. The bad guys know about holes in these things. They attack them. You've got to install that regularly. Many routers, as you can see here, like mine, will allow you to automatically search the vendor site and see if there's an update and install it. Newer ones typically will do that. If you have a really old router, I suggest you go buy a new one. It'll be much more secure, and it'll have a lot of features that will make you more secure. Again, some other things you can do for your router. I know I'm about out of time, so I'm not going to hit all these. You all are welcome to reach out to me if you have questions about this and you don't have IT people that can help. If you use a virtual private network, hopefully your organization provides one. That's the best type of VPN. If they don't, you can use a service like NordVPN. I like Nord. And if you're going to be out on remote sites, connecting to networks that are not under your control, I cannot strongly recommend enough. Either don't use them at all, use a hotspot on your phone, or only use them when you have a VPN. Again, do your homework. You have to vet these things. It's been proven that some VPNs are basically malware. Some of the better ones, again, I like Nord. I use Nord, IPVanish, and TunnelBear. Make sure you have a firewall turned on your devices. These get increasingly technical. Windows has a built-in firewall. Turn it on. Encryption. If you have sensitive data, if you have information that you're sharing with your subcontractors and so forth, don't send sensitive plans. Don't send sensitive information via email unless you encrypt it. Microsoft Office 365 can provide encryption for emails out of the box. Encrypt the data on your hard disk with BitLocker. It's built into Windows. It costs nothing. Make sure when you use a website that it supports encryption. You'll look for that HTTPS up there. I do want to point out that just because you see HTTPS here does not mean the website is legitimate. The bad guys can register a certificate, but it does mean encryption is enforced and that the information being sent back and forth is secure. Just remember, simply because you see HTTPS does not guarantee the legitimacy of the other end. Vet your software carefully. There are organizations like PC Magazine, ZDNet, CNET, Consumer Reports, where they have editors and experts that will test software. Don't just go download the latest and greatest thing you find on the internet or because someone told you you need it, okay? Do your homework. Call your nerdy friend like me. Don't install things you don't need. Don't install things when you don't understand where they came from. We see examples again like TikTok, popular social media platform. It's basically Chinese spyware. Last few things, I'll get to the resources and then take whatever questions. Hardening, again, a little more technical. In the industry, to nerds like me, hardening means going in and locking systems down, removing applications that aren't necessary, turning off services that are unnecessary, configuring them in such a way like password policies so that someone must have a strong password to use that system. All of these things can be done. Many of them are fairly easy. I'd like to point out the CIS benchmarks. This is a very well-known, very reputable organization. They put out benchmarks for every type of software you could imagine. You know, Windows servers, Linux servers, Oracle server, SQL server, of how to lock those things down. So if you don't have the internal IT expertise in your organization, you can follow these benchmarks and make your systems much, much more difficult to hack. Backup. Not only can backup potentially be the antidote for ransomware if you get it, you know, your building could burn down. You could get hit with a tornado. You need to be backing up your data. You need to encrypt that backup data. And probably the most important thing about backup is just because you have a backup does not mean you can restore it. You need to test those backups occasionally. I would point out here very quickly the rule of three copies of your data, the original, a copy, and a copy of the copy. One of those should be off site somewhere. There are all kinds of great cloud-based backup services. OneDrive for Microsoft can be a good basic backup. You need to have a backup. Again, it might be the only recourse against ransomware. The cloud tools or platforms like Google G Suite or Microsoft Office 365/Azure can potentially, despite the fact that your data is out there in the cloud and their systems, make you much more secure. They have very advanced security capabilities. You should explore the possibility of using either some sort of hybrid cloud where you have some on-premise equipment and services and some in the cloud, or moving everything to the cloud. Here's a list of just some general things that don't really fit in any one of these buckets. You know, don't let your family use your work devices. Keep them on their own devices so they're not potentially downloading software that's really malware. Vendor management. As you work with subcontractors, you know, the Target breach came through a subcontractor. Lockheed Martin was breached through a subcontractor. What are you doing about vendor management? Do they have policies and procedures that you're going to make them follow? How are they connecting to your networks? Something to think about. Again, kind of a laundry list of things. If you have one, engage with your security team early and often. Get them involved in the process to help protect your systems. And then CETA, Security Education, Training, and Awareness. There are great organizations. I got some links here at the end. We've got about 3 slides left where, you know, we use Know Before at Intrust. We use Know Before at Fort Wright. We recommend Know Before to our customers because it's an organization that has a variety of security tools, and they can do phishing testing for your employees. They'll send fake phishing emails to your employees to see who clicks them. And if they do click them, they'll give them immediate feedback, run them through some training. They have a lot of great training. Use a framework. If you don't know where to start, if you don't have anything and you're thinking, gosh, Dave, this is all really terrifying. I don't know what to do. This is overwhelming. I don't know how to go forward. Take a look at something like the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. The latest version is 1.1. It's free. Your tax dollars have already paid for it. And it's a great way to take a risk-based approach to how do I improve my cybersecurity hygiene. Again, Cybersecurity Framework from NIST. I would strongly recommend you take a look at that. There are others, but it's a very low friction, very low cost way to get started. Be vigilant and keep learning. Right, this stuff changes constantly, unfortunately. The bad guys know this is hard to keep up with, and you really have to try to stay on top of this, or at least have someone either in your organization, a nerdy friend like me, or work with a company like Intrust to help you stay on top of this. Skepticism and security. You got to put the stuff, you got to put it on everything, right? I mean, you got to be skeptical. The bad guys are constantly changing their tactics. You know, hope and denial are not a strategy. Remember the 3 steps: stop, think, protect. Be a human firewall. And I also want to point out that while this probably is a lot to take in, you know, if you do have a strong cybersecurity posture, that can be a competitive advantage for you. More and more companies are being asked by their customers. We see it all the time, and a major role I play is working with our customers to help them show their customers how they're compliant with things like the NIST 800-171 framework or the ISO 2701 framework. You know, we see customers who are being told by their customers, we won't even give you an RFP unless you can show us how you comply with this particular cybersecurity framework or something like that. So again, this can be a competitive advantage to your organization by getting out in front of this, so when these things come up and your competitors aren't prepared, you are. Here's a whole bunch of resources. I'm a big fan of Twitter. These are all Twitter accounts I like to follow because they're just a steady stream of cybersecurity related information to help you stay aware of what's going on. see the trends, and protect yourself and your family and your organization. Here's a whole bunch of additional resources, links to just about everything I talked about here today, including the NIST cybersecurity framework. So a lot of good resources here. We do cybersecurity related training if anyone would be interested in that. That's all I got for you. I'm happy to take your questions. Yes, that is the tinfoil hat they made for me at the office. And I love this quote: "You are an essential ingredient in our ongoing effort to reduce security risk." Every one of us is. With that, thank you very much. I'm happy to answer your questions. There's all my contact information. You can reach out to me anytime you have a question or concern or you think I can help. But if I don't know the answer, I'll try to help you find someone that can. So with that, again, thank you, and feel free to fire whatever questions you have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I did see one question here. Let me find it. It says, is cybersecurity something that we should add to staff meetings or have an annual refresher like we do with, for example, drug-free workplace?
Well, now again, you're talking to the tinfoil hat guy, so I'm going to say yes. My advice to you would be, take a good look at an organization like KnowBe4. They can provide ongoing training throughout the year. To our regular customers, we offer as a service, where we'll come out on whatever basis you want. Most companies do it once a year, and kind of do a presentation like this. Talk about the latest trends and the things you should be looking for and what you should do. But, all it takes is one slip up. I would encourage everyone out there, to watch the video from Tony over at Cincinnati Hoist and Crane about the impact on his business, because he thought, I'm a small business, I got nothing of value. And what they did was, again, they got in, figured out who he was doing business with, and then sent bogus invoices that looked just like real Cincinnati Crane invoices with different payment information. They lost over $200,000 as a result of this. He had to lay people off, almost put him out of business. But hear him in his own words say, I didn't believe this could happen to me. And it did. And this kind of thing happens every day because of things like bad passwords and people not realizing that this is a real possibility and focusing on that stop, think, protect, human firewall mentality. So I think, I don't think you need to talk about it every single day. I don't think you need to not be able to sleep at night as a result of it. But, I think it should become a part of the vernacular of every business. Executives should talk about it. There should be awareness training, because all it takes is one slip up, and, best case, maybe you're only just in the news. Worst case, you're out of business because all of your data is encrypted, and they want, $5 million for you to get it back, and you don't have $5 million.
Awesome. Thank you. I think those are all of the questions for now. But again, you see Dave's contact information. If you have questions after the fact, feel free to reach out to him. Yeah. I highly suggest that you follow him on LinkedIn. He always posts lots of insightful information, interviews that he's been on with the media and things like that. And then also, I know he put a lot of Twitter handles and links to different websites. The presentation is downloadable through the event website under his session. I'll also send them out separately after the event today as well, so you can refer back to that. But in the meantime, we're going to wrap up here. Thanks again, Dave. Great information.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And, again, if you need help, feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to try to help if I can.
Awesome. So at this time, if everybody wants to leave this room, there should be a blue button at the bottom right. This is leave room. It'll take you back to the main meeting. Feel free to take a break, and the next group of breakout sessions will start at 10:30. So we'll have you in those specific rooms at that point. So thanks again.